welcome to everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here today on behalf of Plastic Bank. We have a very exciting webinar to share with everyone today. We have some excellent speakers from around the world, in which we will speak a little bit about the stewardship of people of faith towards the environment. And so before we get started with introductions of our honored speakers, what I'd like to do is just share a video, especially as folks are arriving to the webinar. And this video shows a little bit of Plastic Bank's work in the Philippines, fighting both poverty and plastic waste. Peter, would you please play the video for us?
Okay, can you see it already on the screen? Yeah, okay.
Yes. Peter, I'm not sure that there's sound. All right, so that video shared a little bit of the reality of folks in Manila and the work that Plastic Bank is doing. For those of you that have joined us during the video, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Plastic Bank to our Interfaith webinar, Jubilee and the Three Abrahamic Traditions. Today, we're going to speak a little bit about the concept of Jubilee as one of regeneration and reconciliation. This is a time when the land is given a rest, debts are forgiven, and sold land is returned. Economic activities are set within the limits of creation, and well-being for all members of society. The flourishing of all life is given priority to replenish and restore. These concepts play an important role in the three Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They also underline the principles of Plastic Bank's model to help stop ocean plastic while improving the lives of collector communities. Our speakers today will speak on behalf of each of their faith traditions, speaking into the responsibility that we have as stewards of creation. Just want to point out a couple of housekeeping things, a couple of practical things. If you're new to GoToWebinar, there should be a panel on the right-hand side. And in that panel, you have a section there called questions. So if you click on that little triangle there, it'll open up the questions box, and you are welcome and invited to type in questions throughout the webinar. Towards the end of the webinar, we will respond to as many questions as we can, and the ones that we're not able to answer, we'll follow up in an email. So again, just welcoming all of you, those folks that have just joined us. Today we are coming together as different religions because we are all called to be stewards of the environment. And we live in a time of great crisis of the environment. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There are many challenges that are facing humanity. And this time, this idea of Jubilee is really one in which we are invited to enter into a time of reconciliation. And so I think today this webinar is as much a response to this crisis as it is a result of prayer, in which the diversity of these religions, of these traditions, expresses a relationship with a supreme power that surpasses our human capacities alone. We come from afar, from different countries, not only for many of us by reason of geographic distance, but also because of the respective historical and spiritual origins of our faith. I think that this meeting attests to the real significance for the people of our time, that in the great battle that we have for peace, for humanity and its very diversity, must draw from its deepest and most vivifying sources, where its conscience is formed and upon which is founded the moral action of all people. It is our hope that today's meeting of the Abrahamic peoples can be an important sign to the world, a sign of our mutual commitment to promote peace, to fight poverty, and to become better stewards of the environment. In 1986, Pope John Paul II called together the world's religious leaders in Assisi. And I think that it's important to remember this time as we're living in this time of the season of creation. The fact that we profess different creed does not detract from the significance of this. On the contrary, the world religions are showing that we are eager for the good of humanity, for the poor, the marginalized, and the reconciliation of humanity with creation. Today we have the honor of welcoming David Katz, who is the founder and CEO of Plastic Bank. David has been named one of the world's most compassionate entrepreneurs by Salt Magazine. He is the recipient of the United Nations Lighthouse Award for Planetary Health, along with many other awards. David is the founder and CEO of Plastic Bank, an internationally recognized solution to ocean plastic. David, I'd like to welcome you and give you the opportunity to greet and welcome all of those that are attending.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to Caroline and to Kamran and to Yonatan and to everyone who has participated in this very important event. Now, I'm welcoming everyone here from the beautiful fall day in Vancouver. And thank you for the accolade. However, I am just a regular human being, and we've been very powerful in the knowing that the solution to truly keeping plastic out of the ocean lies in the beautiful sustainable development goal of ending poverty. I recognize that the United Nations goals, these 1 to 17 goals, lie in order. Number 1 being end poverty. It's it should be no conflict in the realization that we have to steward the poor to steward creation. And the plastic bank's work takes us around the world to create what ultimately is a chain of locations or a chain of store for the poor, where everything in the store can be purchased using plastic garbage, from cooking fuel and groceries to Wi-Fi and everything the poor need but couldn't afford, using garbage as money for the world. It was a paradigm to view what others discarded as waste as worth. I recognize that that plastic material is of creation as well. We've grown around the world. We continue to grow from Haiti, the Philippines, Indonesia, Brazil. We're moving into Vietnam this year, Cameroon, and others as we grow this great organization. My word for everyone here is that the endeavor is very large. If you could imagine what's had to occur to create this organization from some guy in Vancouver, I wanted to share that, of course, when I had the idea, this realization that change could exist and that this could possibly be a solution for humanity and for creation itself, I was overwhelmed with the doubt and the improbability of the task. I had the idea of the plastic bank, using plastic as money. My second thought was the humanity inside of it. I was a human and the thinking that I could not be it. But the creation of the plastic bank came in what I would say was a divine thought. That it was not needed to be the person that could create this for the world, but rather that it was for me to become the person who could create this for the world. And my invitation to anyone who is listening to participate, not just within the plastic bank, but in service over creation, is that we don't need to be the people. We need to slowly listen to the divine power that draws us to become who we need to be in the world. So I thank everyone for being a part of this. I'm inspired by the faith that is here to see this dream come into realization where all people serve all people. So with that, I welcome everybody and thank you for being here and remind you that the world calls you to become what it needs you to be. So I thank you, and back to you, Ryan and Peter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. A truly inspirational moment that founded the Plastic Bank, and I think also that has welcomed us all here today. Our next speaker, Kamran Shezad, comes from us from the Islamic perspective. He is the co-director of the Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences. He is the climate change advisor to the Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board in the United Kingdom and the sustainability lead for the Bahu Trust. He holds a master's degree in environmental sustainability, has been awarded Chartered Environmentalist status by the Society of the Environment, and is a full member of the Institute for Environmental Management and Assessment. He has developed a number of faith-based community toolkits, video messaging campaigns, and resources to promote sustainability and positive environmental behavior for various faith communities. We welcome Kamran, who will be speaking to us about the reconciliation with the earth. Kamran, I think you may be on mute.
Hello, Kamran. Please unmute yourself. Okay, we see your slideshow. Now we only need your camera and your mic. It's above the slideshow. The two bottoms, the camera and the mic. Kindly press those so they move to green. Okay, you are unmuted now.
Is that better? Can you all hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm just sorting out my slideshow. Okay, thank you for that kind introduction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. I'm in the company of some esteemed guests and panelists, and no doubt those in the audience too. So the concept of reconciliation, it's quite interesting, because the more I was reading into this, is actually the more embarrassed I was becoming myself, because it got me to think about my own behaviors and the things I need to do. And so when we talk about reconciliation, I suppose there's two formats to reconciliation. And one is where both parties agree that they are at fault, and through this process we find a common ground and reconcile our differences. And another viewpoint is where someone admits their fault and wishes to reconcile to redemption and, more importantly, action. And if we're talking about reconciliation in my first option, then I think we have a serious issue, we have a problem here, and that we're quite arrogant in our way of thinking, and I think that's why we're in the problem we are. But moving forward, I think to reconcile with the earth, we need to realize that we are at fault. And I suppose one of the things that I want to mention, that as people of faith, I think they say 85% of the global population relates to some form of faith. And I know, as much as everyone else does, that our faith teaches us about care for creation, taking care of our planet. There's no faith that I've come across yet that asks us to cause damage. It asks us to balance. Yeah, it's important that if that's the case, that why are we in the situation we are now? Have we, as people of faith, failed? Why are we at a point where we have to reconcile? If we were true to our faith teachings, to our scriptures, we shouldn't be in the chaos that we're facing at the moment. And there's a reason why I mention that, is because we talk about reconciliation and regeneration, but I think one of the other words that we also need to think about is reflect. That we need to really seriously reflect. And so from a Quranic perspective, this Quranic ayah, that corruption has appeared in both land and sea as a result of people's actions, the consequences of which they may taste, so that hopefully they will turn back. And this is a verse in the Holy Quran where God is warning us that the consequences of what we're doing is causing that corruption to both land and sea. But also, so that they may taste, so that hopefully they will turn back. So God is asking us in the Holy Quran to reflect, to reconcile, because if you do that, you can go back to the good times, to what earth provides you. And that's very important for us as Muslims, and this is very universal. And I think the Quranic verses that I've chosen today are universal and speak to everybody. And then in another verse, the Holy Quran also says, adhere to the Fitra of Allah upon which He has created all people. There is no altering God's creation, and this is the right path, though most people do not realize. So here God is telling us. So the word Fitra in Arabic means the natural state, the natural pattern. So God is telling us He's created it for us in a very specific way. And so that pattern, there shouldn't be any altering it, yet we alter it. And yet our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, also says to us, he's quoted as saying that the earth is sweet and green, and verily God has made you stewards over it. So again, it comes back down to regenerating. It's for us not to manage the earth, but to tend to the earth. And so that Fitra, that natural pattern. What is that pattern? It's exactly what you see directly in front of you, that spinning earth. And if any of you have heard of the pale blue dot, you know, in the vast universe, we are tiny, we're minuscule, we were nothing. But this planet is a biosphere. Everything we need is provided for us. The water we drink, the food we eat, the air we breathe is unique, one of a kind, as far as we know. So this is part of the fitra. So everything we're doing is causing damage to it, because the system, the natural pattern that God has created, is we are causing corruption to it. And then I came across these other two Quranic verses, which I thought were so important. And I suppose it tackles our arrogance. So in one verse, God says to us, surely the creation and the heavens and the earth is greater than the creation of man, but most people know not. And also, do you not see that God has made what is in the heaven and earth subservient to you and made complete to you his favors outwardly and inwardly? And for this, quite often, us as people, we think we're better. We are God's greatest creation. Yet we're being told you're not. The creation of the heavens and the earth is greater than that of us. And then also, when God tells us that all the creation in earth has been made subservient to us, so it's there to provide us. So we can take resources, but what we take with one hand, we give back with the other. And quite often, you know, when we think of nature, because we control, we overpower nature, but only because God has commanded nature or to be subservient to us. So if you look at the ocean, for instance, the ocean comes in and out, in and out. If God ever commanded the ocean to continue going out, continue going into land, that would be us doomed. Volcanoes, mountains, if they were to be destroyed or to fall on us, that would be the end of us. So if we're talking about how nature provides, a good old example is the humble tree. A tree is something we take for granted. You know, we ignore them quite often. You know, they're now being cut down, we're having huge issues. And these are a list of all the services that the tree provides us. It provides us with oxygen, it cleans the air, it conserves energy, it provides wood, it prevents water pollution, it marks the season, creates unity, it gives us medicine, habitat for wildlife. So when we talk about regeneration and reconciling, quite often when we buy a house, you know, people slab their gardens, they cut down trees, we forget that that tree is actually part of a wider circle. And if we continue in the growth and with what we're doing and how we're doing it, this is what we'll end up like. This is a picture of planet Mars. No oxygen, no water, no food, no nothing. So that's the last place we want to be. And then one of the other things that we seriously need to do is reconcile our relationship with nature. And the Holy Quran states that there is no creature on or within the earth or bird that flies with its wings except that they are communities like you. And we have not neglected in the register a thing, then unto their Lord will they be gathered. And our earth's natural system, it all provides for us. We're reliant on them, we're reliant on nature and animals and insects. And biodiversity is required for our food. And as part of that fitra, that natural pattern that I mentioned earlier, you know, the bees, they pollinate. Without bees, we don't have food. If bees were to be extinct, human nature would be extinct within a generation. If we think about Noah's Ark, you know, quite often the message we take from the story of Prophet Noah, that if you don't believe in God, then God will wipe out the earth and start again. But we quite often forget that one of the key messages from that was God asked Noah to take all the animals, because the animals will sustain the planet. you know, and we need to pay heed to that. And also, even now, like one of the symptoms of what we're facing is COVID. You know, because of a lack of respect for the natural world and biodiversity, we're finding the increase of zoonosis and zoonotic diseases like COVID. You know, COVID comes from the disrespect of the natural world, and we will continue. And our, you know, dealing with COVID isn't necessarily, you know, social distancing and face masks. Yeah, that deals with the symptoms, but we're going to continue getting more issues in the future if we don't reconcile our relationship with nature. And here, what I find for me very significant about this Quranic verse, that God is saying that we're like communities. It puts us on an equal footing with everything, every bird, every creature on this earth. And it even tells us that when we're resurrected on the day of judgment, everything on a register that's been recorded of being on this, we will be held accountable for it. I'm just coming towards the end of my section. This picture is quite important to me. I mean, that little good-looking boy you see there, who happens to take his father's good looks, is my 6-year-old son. And the reason I mention this is because campaigning and advocacy and standing up for ecological justice is very much part of our ibadah and very much part of our worship, because we have to stand up for the rights of everybody. And that's my son, whose hand is being held with Rabbi Newman from London, from an EcoSeek coordinator, next to whose name is Probjat Singh, and next to him is Vishwapani, a Buddhist leader, who's telling my son that he's a future leader. And then we have Qari Asim, the one of the leading imams in the UK, and then Archbishop Ron Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury. And this is so important because this is something Rabbi Yonatan Neril said in a talk that I listened to him a couple of years ago. He said, this isn't the time to push our religion and faith on people. This isn't the time to convert people. There's one religion right now. It's planet Earth. We have to take care of our Earth, and we all have to come together. We have no planet. We have no planet. We have to be answerable, and we will be answerable in the eyes of God. So part of reconciling isn't just doing our own personal actions, but also standing up for justice. And I think that's very key. And you know, our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had said that if you see an injustice, you do something about it. And if you can't do something about it, then you speak up against it. And if you can't speak out against it, then you just think bad about it. But that's the least of your faith. That's the end of my section. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope that was useful, and I look forward to listening to the other panelists and also taking any questions later.
Kamran, thank you very much for that presentation and the perspective. I think very powerful words there on the idea of speaking out for injustice and doing something about it. And I think it's also important to highlight that that faith without works is dead, and that we must put our faith into action. And it's beautiful to see, especially that picture at the end, you putting that together and giving us a concrete example of that. Our next speaker, Yonatan Neril, comes from Jerusalem, comes today to us from Jerusalem. His background is that he's a rabbi, the founder of the and director of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development. Raised in California, Yonatan completed an MA and BA from Stanford University with a focus on global environmental issues, and received rabbinical ordination in Israel. He has spoken internationally on religion and the environment. He co-organized 10 interfaith environmental conferences in Jerusalem and in the US. He is the lead author and general editor of 3 books on Jewish environmental ethics, including Eco Bible and Ecological Commentary. He lives with his wife, Shana, and their 2 children in Jerusalem. Today, Yonatan is going to speak on behalf of what Jewish teachings have to do with sustainable humanity, and looking at Greta's solarship and young people's awakening. Rabbi?
Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining wherever you are. So I am going to share with you briefly about the Jubilee year from a Jewish perspective. The Jubilee year is mentioned in the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, for those who have their Bibles on hand. And it says that it's supposed to be a year that every 50 years, the context in Leviticus chapter 25 is of every 7th year, the sabbatical year. That's how the first 7 verses of Leviticus chapter 25 begin. And interestingly, after those 7 verses that relate to this resting once for 1 year every 7 years, that the whole society was supposed to rest, the whole Israelite society. So then the Leviticus says, you shall count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 sets of years gives you a total of 49 years. And then verse 9 says, then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, the day of atonement, you shall have the horn sounded throughout your land. So yesterday in Israel and elsewhere in the world was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And the Jubilee year is supposed to begin at the end of 7 cycles in the 50th year. So it's actually in biblical Israel, the people would have rested on the 7th year, and then they would rest for a 2nd year in a row on the 50th year. So they'd rest in the 49th year and the 50th year. Economic activity would stop, farming would stop, and the people would focus on spirituality. They'd focus on recharging themselves. I'm going to share with you a few slides. Before I do that, I just want to share with you an interesting historical facts that correspond to spiritual reality, which is that human society today does not rest every 50 years. And since the temple was destroyed by the Romans about 2,000 years ago, the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, the Jews have not been observing a Jubilee year because it's considered tied to the temple. But it's very interesting, because if you look a little bit at history, if you go back to 1870, which was 150 years ago, the Franco-Prussian War triggered a big smallpox epidemic in Europe that claimed 500,000 lives. 50 years later, approximately, the Spanish flu, but which actually began in the Midwestern United States, claimed as many as 25 million lives. 50 years after that, in 1968, 1969, there was a flu epidemic that began in Hong Kong, which killed an estimated 1 to 4 million people. And 50 years after that, we have our current pandemic of COVID. So that as an introduction, I'm going to show my screen, which is planet Earth as our ship. And you can see here that we've essentially created a series of icebergs that we are now colliding with year after year, sort of like the ship Titanic, in the form of fires. There are record fires currently burning in Northern California that just spread in a couple of days. And they've had fires now for a month, droughts, flooding. There was also a record hurricane season in the Caribbean and Atlantic. We're essentially drilling small holes on the collective ship that we call planet Earth. And part of that through our plastic consumption, which plastic is a petroleum product. Here's an example of eating meat, which probably came wrapped in plastic. The question is, how can people act now to avert danger in the future? And last year, the Great Midwestern Flood halted barge traffic on the Mississippi River. And Greta, as you know, sailed on a solar ship to the UN General Assembly, where she spoke as a way to reduce her carbon emissions. And so she's become a leader of the global climate movement. I want to focus for a few minutes on the role of religious teachers to help us think long-term, moderate consumption, and find greater pleasure in the spiritual and communal. And this relates to the Jubilee year and rejuvenation, and it also relates to plastic pollution, because there are deeper roots for why we have plastic pollution. I went on a vacation with my wife and 2 children a few weeks ago, and we went to the Mediterranean, and we went into the water, and really for the first time I saw plastic in greater quantity than I'd experienced before. And the question is, where is this plastic coming from? And I'm not going to go into that now, but part of it has to do with our consumption. That humanity, many billions of people now, are living a lifestyle that is based on disposable products. Much of the food that we consume and the drinks that we consume, aside from water or even bottled water, comes in single-use plastics. And people use it and throw it out. And I believe that religious leaders and teachers and clergy can help people to moderate our consumption and switch to longer-term use and more durable use. Now the question is, are religious clergy currently making enough effort to teach on this topic? Here's an example of a community garden outside of a church. My organization, the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, is working to reveal the connection between religion and ecology and mobilize people to act. So we've organized interfaith ecological conferences in Israel, in the United States, and part of it talks about rejuvenation, resting, the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year. How do we moderate our consumption? We've also been doing a project in Africa to promote solar energy on church lands. It's called the Faith-Inspired Renewable Energy Project. And a lot of this is based on the idea that moderating consumption is related to spiritual satisfaction. And that goes back to this idea of rejuvenation, because the Jubilee year is supposed to be about finding spiritual satisfaction in the divine, in family and community, and not in our physical consumption. But as Kamran was saying, we're unbalanced today, and a lot of that imbalance is because we have put too much emphasis on the physical. We are spiritual beings living a physical reality, and religious teachers can help to remind us about that. Now, another aspect of rejuvenation is about altruism. That studies have shown that the act of giving can activate the area of the brain associated with positive feelings, lifting your spirits and making you feel better the more you give. So that's another aspect of rejuvenating ourselves, is transitioning from a society of being net takers to being net givers. The ecological crisis is messaging to us that we need to raise our level of spiritual awareness. The human being has many levels of soul. According to Kabbalah, the mystical Jewish tradition, there are 25 levels of soul, and consumer society operates at the lowest level of soul. That's why the adversary, each of us has a personal adversary. It's telling us to buy and eat and drink and more than we need. But spirituality and religion can help us to be more altruistic and to give more. At the physical level, we can compost, decrease our meat consumption, decrease air travel, buy in bulk, and reuse and reduce. Buying in bulk in particular is a way to reduce plastic waste. Because, especially if we bring our own containers. Humanity used to live with reusable containers. It's only in the recent decades that we've transitioned to a largely disposable society. And to reuse and reduce, I would also add rethink and rejuvenate and regenerate. So we're all on the same boat, and we need to we need all hands on deck. The question is, some people say, well, did you make a difference? Does one person make a difference? And the question is not, did my actions change the world? The question is, did I do everything in my power when everything was at stake? And Kamran showed his son in the protest. I was at a climate protest in Jerusalem last week, which was led by a 14-year-old woman. Young people are really waking up to this, and that we need to prioritize our efforts to focus on sustainability, or else all of our other efforts are just going to go down the drain. And I'll finish with a story that the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison said about a young boy who came to an elder woman with a bird in his hands. And he said to the woman, "Can you tell me whether the bird is alive or dead?" And she thought for a minute, and she realized that the boy was playing a trick on her. Because if she said the bird was dead, the boy would open his hands and the bird would fly away. And if she said that the bird was alive, the boy would close his hands and crush the bird, and either way she'd be wrong. So she looked at him and she said to him, "I don't know whether the bird is alive or dead. All I know is that the life of the bird is in your hands." And that's our situation today. This is our website if you want to have learn more on the religion and ecology resources we have. And thank you so much.
Rabbi, what a beautiful way to end the presentation. The planet really is in our hands, and each of us, from our own perspective, make an important impact. So thank you for that. Our next speaker, Caroline Bader, holds a diploma in religious education and community development and a certificate of advanced studies in international organizations management from the University of Geneva, Switzerland. She served for 5 years as youth secretary of the Lutheran World Federation, where she organized climate justice advocacy training around the world, accompanied youth climate projects in 30 countries, and led the LWF delegations to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In 2018, Caroline started to work with GreenFaith as the director of the Multifaith Sustainable Living Initiative, Living the Change, and now also serves as the coordinator of GreenFaith International. She has been vegetarian for 25 years, loves her bicycle, and has just switched to renewable energy at her family home in Germany. Caroline will be speaking to us about the Jubilee from a Christian perspective. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope that you can hear me, and maybe you can also see me. Yes, I see that works. 1 second as I get back on screen. Okay, so just to say, who's GreenFaith? We are Interfaith Partners in Action for the Earth, and I will speak a bit later on the ways and how we bring people of faith together and how we invite you all into network and action together. But I'm also here as a Christian, as a Protestant, as a Lutheran, and I would like to share with you a little bit my findings on a Christian perspective on the concept of Jubilee. Similar to Rabbi Jonathan, I've also first looked into the Old Testament where this concept comes from, or the Torah. So in Leviticus 25, verse 10 to 13, we read, "Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows or of itself, or harvest the untended vines. For it's a jubilee, and it's to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of jubilee, everyone is to return to their own property." Well, we could count the numbers of how often the word jubilee is mentioned here, but I'm not going into that. But I wanted to give you some context, in addition to what Rabbi Jonathan shared already on the historic context to these verses. As you know, the concept of Sabbath means on the 7th day of each week, God's people were free from the need to produce or consume. That's a very important concept, both for Jewish and Christian believers. The rest was extended to animals and the land itself, honoring the Creator by allowing creation to rest. And then following the seventh or the 49th year, God's people were to dedicate a year to this ecological, social, and economic restorative justice, a jubilee for the earth. And you have to imagine that during those times, everyone lived, or most of them lived from agricultural or pastoral economies. So you needed land to survive. And families at that time would only receive new land through a lottery or a raffle. But if you're struggling and later on needed to sell that land, your family would certainly become poor, and your children would have no land. The Jubilee concept means to get it back after 50 years because your debts are remitted. The other meaning of Jubilee is also that the slaves were to let go. So this is the promise of God to his people of Israel to set them free from the land of Egypt. So slaves were to let go. And the reason for this concept of having a Jubilee every 50 years is that every generation should have the chance to be freed from debts and free from slavery. And no poverty should remain longer than one generation. The children of God are promised a prosperous life. And I find this very important. And also, speaking about the mission of Plastic Bank, fighting poverty, here there's a biblical promise that every 50 years, the new generation receives a blank page, so to say. They're ready to start again. The word Jubilee itself is very different in the German translations. And I was struggling about that term. Because in German, you would translate it with, not with the celebration aspect of that, but with the translation erlassen, to waive or to remit. So it's to waive your debts, or if you have a waiver, if you can travel in a country, you may know that, or to remit your sins, your debts. But it also means to rest or to let go. And with that, I want to look into the New Testament as well, where we can read something about what I call the sweet smell of freedom. So in the New Testament, we read in the book of Luke 4, chapter 4, 18 to 21. We read the story of Jesus. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom, on the Sabbath day. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." So the Christian view on that is that we relate to the Old Testament, that old promise, and say we can proclaim these good news to the poor. We proclaim freedom for the prisoners. The oppressed will be set free. And we proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And what I find is interesting is the last sentence, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Because you hear me say that, this scripture is fulfilled. So it needs a recipient. We are becoming active. And that is also the reason why I think the Jubilee is such a beautiful concept of letting go, of being freed. We are to let go of owning the land, owning and consuming something. We are to let go of regular habits, so to say, to sow the land or to pick the vines. We are also free and to let go of destructive and exploitative behaviors, such as wasting, such as exploiting the soil, the oceans, wasting the oceans, and many more. We can let go of slavery, from money, from property, from ideals, from idols. We can let go of fear. and we can let go of loneliness. And those promises are also in those biblical stories where you can read about what you are invited to embrace. We embrace to be free. We embrace to live simple. We embrace to be with your loved ones. And that's very similar to what Rabbi Jonathan earlier said, that you find the divine in family, in love, loved ones, and in nature, and not through consumption. We embrace to be debt-free. We embrace the good gifts of the earth. And we embrace to celebrate together. It's a jubilee. And again, here comes the celebration aspect. We are welcome and we are invited to celebrate together. I want to share with you also how some 2,000 years later, Christian communities respond to this. And I want to share from the Lutheran World Federation's 12th Assembly in 2017, where I was present in Namibia and where we worked on this climate change resolution. The global ecological crisis, including climate change, is human-induced. It is a spiritual matter. As people of faith, we are called to live in right relationship with creation and not exhausted. And in the Season of Creation Guide 2020, so this is the ecumenical perspective, we read, as we live into a post-COVID-19 world, can we imagine new, just and sustainable ways of living that give the earth the rest it requires, that satisfy everyone with enough, that restore habitats and renew biological diversity? May holy wisdom inspire our imagination. And with that said, I want to also close with 3 short quotes by, or witnesses by, people who have joined our program called Living the Change, where it's about personal lifestyle change. And I like their quote so much. Dominica, who is a Catholic, says, "We can create a chain of action that will keep growing and replicating." And Dr. Sailesh Rao, a Hindu from the US, says, "I felt a spiritual uplift within a week after my transition, the transition into a sustainable lifestyle, when I had this huge sense of guilt lift off my shoulders." And finally, Misbah from the UK, a Muslim mother, says, "If God has given us this earth, it should be protected at all costs, and this thought convinced me to change my life." 3 people of faith, of different religions, all ready to make a change, to take this sabbatical time, to take this time of reconciliation and change something and live in right relationship with the earth. At GreenFaith, we invite you also to think about what we can do together as people of faith, as religious leaders. And I want to share with you our brand new mission statement that reads, "Because the earth and all people are sacred and at risk, GreenFaith is building a worldwide, multi-faith climate and environmental movement. Together, our members create communities to transform ourselves, our spiritual institutions, and society, to protect the planet and create a compassionate, loving, and just world." So we are free to create that compassionate, loving, and just world. With those words, I would like to, end this presentation and just invite you to join the movement, start taking action. 3 options are here. My colleagues have shared other options. It's important you get active and you don't stay passive. Thank you very much.
Caroline, thank you so much for that presentation. I really liked your reflection on freedom. Given by God, we're invited to choose between what's good and what's best for us, and we have responsibilities to ourselves, to our brothers and sisters, and in a special way towards creation. So very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. We'll now give Peter Nitschke the opportunity to speak on behalf of Plastic Bank's Faith Program. Peter has worked in development in the Philippines since 1997. He supported local communities to set up grassroots cooperatives to facilitate their own economic uplift. He has a vast experience in the Philippine nonprofit world, managing projects in 12 different provinces on different islands with a focus on developing entrepreneurs. Peter's going to speak to us a little bit about the Faith Stewardship Program at the Plastic Bank.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you to all the wonderful presentations and presenters being very, very moved by how the different religions and traditions have such a strong overlap and can create such a strong synergy to make a change. I have now the privilege to share with you what the Plastic Bank is doing about working together with faith communities and how we support faith communities in making a change. And so present to you quickly the Plastic Bank Faith program. And what we said, change has to happen. As we see, plastic is used in the wrong way. It's creating big problems, and we see about 1 dump truck of plastic is going into the oceans per minute. If you put that 50 kilogram plastic bag at the coastline, you can cover the whole coastline with 1 plastic bag after the other, and that is about 400 billion plastic bottles a year that goes into the ocean. And if you continue like this, in 2050 we have more plastic in the ocean than fish. Plastic Bank is engaging communities of faith because, like what we have seen, there's such a strong common ground, but there's also a strong way that people in those faith communities are using plastic, and so we can work together to reveal the plastic value, as David already said, to fight poverty and to transform the world. Plastic Bank is now 7-year-old. We have about 290 plastic collection stations. We work with 20,000 plastic collectors. We have collected about 13 million kilos of plastic that otherwise would have ended up in the ocean, because we have created a circular economical model where plastic goes back into the economy, as David already has said. And so in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, we work with the Archdiocese there. We are part of the Laudato Si campaign. We have now engaged 40 parishes there, and we start to set up plastic collection points in those parishes. So that's one way faith communities can work with us in the Global South, setting up plastic collection points. We also work in another city in Brazil that's called Vitória. We have started to collect plastic there as well, despite COVID, as plastic and COVID have become unlucky twins. And so we need to do something to work on that. We also working in the Philippines with the Archdiocese of Manila, and we are planning to start something there as well. So it's powerful things, and we are so grateful for GreenFaith and also IFE's Eco-Islam to connect into other religions, to start, it's like what also Carolyn said, to become part of this worldwide movement that makes a change. In the global north, we are working with the Bisdom of Limburg. We have been part of the Global Day for Cleanup and had some activities there. And we encourage congregation in the global north to neutralize their plastic footprint, supporting congregations in the south. We have created training materials. We have homilies. There is a youth curriculum, and you can visit that, our training platform online at plasticbank.com/faith. And we have flyers, handouts, social media content. So please get in touch with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. And just as another invitation, I think all of our speakers represent religions and different organizations that offer an opportunity to put our faith into action, whether it be any of the world religions. And Peter is doing some great work at the Plastic Bank to bring together different world religions, different houses of worship, organizations to prevent the flow of plastic into the oceans. Now, we've come up to the hour here. Peter, I don't know if you want to take a few questions from the folks that are joining us from the audience here.
There have not been any questions so far, but please, if you have questions, now is the time to put them into the question box and ask us. Maybe give a few minutes for people to write down their questions.
Yes, again, that question box is on the right-hand side. There's a little triangle there that if you click on it, it opens up a box there where you can type your question in. So while we're waiting for questions to come in, I think it could be interesting to, if David is still with us, David, if you have any questions or a reflection based off of any of the presentations here, I just want to give you that opportunity.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I continue to be inspired by the divinity that lies inside of all of us, independent of the way that we would want to call it faith. We all inside of us come from creation and are here to steward and to care for it. I'm touched by the commonality amongst all people, that we have love in our heart, and that love truly is the action. I'm inspired by Stephen Covey and his work in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where I first came to learn that love is a verb, an action, and he communicates that love, the feeling, is the fruit of love, the verb. And for me, I'm so inspired by that, because I know that when I'm in service, when I am in action, when I care for others, when I do for others, I'm filled with a grace of spirit. And it really is my ask in this as well, to have everybody in action. I'm inspired by Caroline and how she is leading a neutral lifestyle as well, and in that as well, the inspiration to be in the regeneration, this period of our lives, to be in the knowing that it's not enough to just not do harm anymore, but it is really called upon us to be in the recreation, into the regeneration, into the repair of the damage that's been done. That's what is being called upon us now. It is beyond doing nothing anymore. And we need to be in the action and stewardship. And our lives are filled with the grace of the Spirit in our action. That'll be my final word, Ryan.
It's a beautiful final word. I'd like to give each one of our presenters the opportunity to share a very brief, maybe 30 to 60 second final word, reflection, encouragement to push our audience to put their faith into action. And we'll start with Kamran and work our way in the same order as we started.
Thank you. I suppose my final reflection was touching on what both Rabbi Yonatan and Caroline spoke about. Rabbi Neril mentioned consumption and the amount of stuff we're consuming, and Caroline spoke about embrace at the end, and what stood out for me was embracing the ability to live simply. And what I take, for me, if I look at our faith leaders like Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the same also goes for our founding leaders and prophets of all our respective faiths, is a one thing that is very similar, is they all lived simple lives. They did not consume worldly goods. They lived very humble lives. So the solution to climate change, plastic pollution, and all the other issues we're facing is, in reality, very simple. It's living within modesty and humility. I think if we can master that, if we can take the true teachings of our faith leaders, we can really reconcile with this planet.
Wonderful. What about yourself, Rabbi? Any final words you want to share with us?
Yes, so thank you, Kamran, for your deep words. I just give us a blessing that we should be able to live in balance with God's creation, that we should be able to find common cause with each other and realize that we're all part of this, we're all in the same boat, and we need to rejuvenate that the crisis that we're encountering is really a waking, it's a wake-up call, and it's going to help us in our spiritual awakening. And through that spiritual awakening, we will be able to come to a reorientation of our relationship with the physical and with nature and come into greater balance. That's my hope for, in a general sense, and I believe that we'll also address plastic pollution through that reorientation and rejuvenation.
Thank you, Rabbi. What about yourself, Caroline?
Yes, well, I think that we have all witnessed and experienced those last months the COVID-19 solitude and the feeling of helplessness and being alone, but also the feeling of not being many enough to solve the problem of the climate emergency and the climate crisis. And what gives me hope and encourages me is from the book of Matthew, chapter 18, that probably many of you have heard before, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I shall be there. And this is really the solution to these problems, doing this together, be in this together. And as GreenFaith, we say the good life is one of connectedness with each other and all of nature. So we send you many greetings and really the hope for this connectedness as people of faith and spirit and goodwill. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you to those of you who have joined us both from Facebook and on GoToWebinar. We hope that this has been an opportunity to deepen in our commitment to the environment, to recognize the responsibility that we've been given as creation, as a part of creation, to be stewards, to care for one another. And as David said very succinctly, the time of doing no harm is over. And that's not a commandment. The commandment is not do no harm, but rather to love. And as he mentioned as well, love is an action. It's a verb. So I just want to thank you on behalf of the Plastic Bank. Encourage.
We have a few questions, Ryan.
Okay, Peter.
One person was asking if the Jewish leaders are planning something for the next Jubilee, if there are plans to implement it. Maybe Jonathan can ask.
Sure.
Answer
so
that.
It's a good question. The Jubilee year is actually not currently observed by Jews, unfortunately. After the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem about 2,000 years ago, the observance was stopped because it was tied up to the existence of the temple. However, Jews do observe the sabbatical year once every 7th year. And there's a big movement within many Jewish communities to really up our observance of the sabbatical year. The Bible talks about it being in relation to farmers, but I and a number of other rabbis understand that what the Bible is talking about is something much deeper than just farmers resting their land, and that it has deep applications to our post-industrial technological society, which is with large service sectors. And we've been encouraging people to think about how can human society rest every 7 years, and that's really something that's needed to rejuvenate and reinvigorate ourselves.
Okay. Another question is, as far as environmental teachings are concerned, where do the three traditions differ, and where do they basically complement each other? That's a question by Travis West.
That's a bit of a loaded question. When people ask about religion and environment, I like to quote what Dr. Fadl Khalid once said when they asked him about the role of religion, and so a similar question. And he answered by saying, look, let's save the planet first, and then we can debate about religion afterwards. And I always find that it's always best, obviously, when we focus on our similarities, is when it comes to careful creation. I think all our faiths are very similar in terms of taking care of our planet and doing all the right actions. I haven't come across any faith that tends to say, that calls for destruction of the earth. All faiths call for some form of a balance.
Yeah, I just wanted to quote my dear colleague Kamran. There's no religion that doesn't talk about it. No, but I think that in the secular recognition, or the public sphere, religions are very often seen as a battlefield, or as seen with bringing tension or whatsoever. Why don't we focus on this work, where working around environment, creation, and climate change, we actually have a very common ground to cover. And we know that there are different concepts of creation, Mother Earth, Gaia, the interconnection with all living beings. But that at the very heart of that, we know that we are not self-sufficient. We come from something divine. We cannot create ourselves. And I think every human being has this deep understanding at some point. So when it comes to climate change and environmental work, it's really a pleasure to work in an interfaith environment. So let's share these good stories and move them forward. So it's also actually a chance for bringing about peace among religions if we do this work together. Thank you.
Totally.
Okay. The last question is about plastic, and it's Paul Garrett is asking if biodegradable plastic would be an alternative. David, would you like to answer that, or should I?
Well, thank you, Peter. And I think it is a beautiful question, and there are alternatives, and in my knowing, and of course we need an army of solutions by an army of people. What I recognize, though, is that there are roughly 9 trillion kilos of plastic on the earth. All the plastic we've ever produced is still here. If we replace the plastic, if we find an alternative that removes all of the value of the plastic that's already in the environment, there will never be an incentive to go and collect it. So there's an unintended consequence with alternatives. I believe that we're beyond the tipping point. I believe that we're at the very moment where we need to reveal the value inside the material that's already there. What we need to do is stop producing new plastic. There's more plastic that we could ever use as a humanity, 9 trillion kilo, using roughly 400 billion a year now. And so that really, I believe, is the solution. We need alternatives for sure. We need to stop using plastic. We need to know that everything that we buy is a vote, and we should be buying and voting for recycled content and the creation of more recycling infrastructure. I believe that maybe inherently we've been depositing the very value to end all suffering. That's what we're trying to do. So there's a need, and there is a unintended consequence with replacing the material. I would love to say differently, but I believe that's the pragmatic, truthful approach. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, David. And Yvonne asked how can she get engage the Plastic Bank Faith program, and the easiest way is to go to our website at plasticbank.com/faith and sign up there. All the resources that you need are there, or email me at peter@plasticbank.com and I will help you to get in touch. Thank you so much, everybody.
Wonderful.
Back to you,
What a great way to end this webinar. Thank you to all the presenters for the reflections, for the attendees. Now let's take everything that we've learned and let's put our faith into action. God bless you all, and be stewards of creation.